Today on the podcast, I have my new friend, Beth Rontal. She is a clinical social worker, did not set out to become the documentation wizard, though. She spent 20 years as a theater costume designer before answering a higher calling to become a trauma therapist. For over 2 decades, she's helped thousands of therapists transform their clinical intuition into clear, compliant documentation that passes audits and protects both client confidentiality and therapist income. She developed these skills while supervising clinicians and helping to create mental health clinics' first digital documentation system. As a nationally known documentation expert, Beth's training, forms, and consultations provide structure and clarity that translate clinical work into notes reflecting high quality care. She continues to maintain her clinical practice in Boston. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, first, I thought that was super interesting that you did costume design.
I spent 20 years in the theater and I loved it. And, but if therapists think finding clients is hard, making it in the theater is a lot harder.
Oh,
And
that's
after 20 years, I said, I think it's time for a change.
yeah, yeah.
And it's been a great change for me. It's
Well, the
wonderful.
therapist world is glad to have you.
I, I was a good designer. I'm a better therapist.
Wonderful. Well, so you have your own practice in Boston. Can you tell me a little bit about that? And then we're going to talk more about fees and guilt. So tell us what you practice.
I work with people who struggle with emotional eating. I wouldn't say I work with eating disorders, although I certainly have plenty of that. But I really work with people who struggle with emotional eating, people who want bariatric surgery, people who need to prepare for bariatric surgery, people who have failed at bariatric surgery. And what comes with that is often trauma
Mm-hmm.
because people eat to stuff their feelings. And what are those feelings and how did they get there? And I also do work with early mother loss because that was my own experience.
Oh, yeah. Well,
So
you are correct on all fronts. I definitely am an emotional eater.
truly, if we took a poll of most of the women in the United States, most of us would come up as emotional eaters, and men too. It's
Yeah,
just, is that the only thing that you use
sure.
to cope with your emotions?
Definitely. Well,
And it
great.
can't be the only thing.
Yeah, well, you're certainly doing important work there. And as you just said, it's something that is very common in our world, needing
Yeah.
assistance. So, yeah, well, today we're going to talk about this topic of getting paid without feeling guilty.
Yeah.
And before we got on, we were talking specifically about, I mean, I think a lot of therapists feel guilty because we're in the helping field, but particularly Christian counselors have this like extra level of guilt because faith in what we do, it's a calling. Like even when I started my practice, I was like, I feel called to this work. God's with me. This is my mission in the world. How could I possibly charge a client for doing ministry, basically? And so let's kind of start there. Maybe tips, thoughts that you have about that.
I think that is a widely held belief by many, many, many therapists. It's a calling, and how can I possibly charge? And I have to be able to take care of everyone, anyone who needs me. And and I understand it because for me, being a therapist was a calling.
Ugh.
What I also know is we cannot participate in our calling, in what we are truly passionate about and feel drawn to, if we don't make a living doing it. We are we are not in an organization that pays us to live so that we can give away our service. We have to get paid, and we're in a high risk profession.
Yeah.
So we have to be mindful of that and careful about that. We think we get paid for our service, but what we really get paid for is our time. Every hour we show up is another hour of our time that we never, ever, ever get back. And what do we want to do with that hour? Well, when this is a calling, this is what we want to do. And when people don't show up, we don't get paid for it. So the first thing I really recommend is that people have very clear cancellation and late cancel and no-show policies. I know that when I was a young therapist, before I went out on my own, I worked in a clinic. And even though we did home visits, their clients would just not show up to their house. Or they wouldn't answer the door. And I had a supervisor, when I asked him, how do I know when it's time to discharge someone? He said, whenever you want. He was kind of letting me learn by my own mistakes. It was actually the wrong thing to tell me for a couple of reasons. One is every time this particular client didn't show up, I didn't get paid. And I had spent my time, my gas, my emotional energy waiting to see her, because if I could just see her, I know I could make a difference.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we bring to our work, this incredible, deep commitment to helping people transform their lives. And that's where our faith is. We can do this. This is a calling, but they have to show up. And if they don't show up, I'm repeating this a lot, we don't get paid, and then we can't do our work. And we are in that high risk profession where we take on people's emotional pain. We take on their troubles, even though we're not supposed to. When you care about someone, you become very invested, and we do care about our clients. And we wonder all the time, how can we do better? What can we do to help them grow more? Well, we have to pay for trainings. We have to pay for groceries, our rent, our mortgage, and we have to pay for our time off. And we are the only ones who can do that if we're in private practice. We are
Yeah.
the only ones who pay for our sick time, our vacation time, our disability time.
Yep.
And if we can't do that, we can't serve the people we're called to take care of.
Yeah.
So, and the other reason that you can't keep a client on indefinitely when they don't show up is if you haven't discharged them and something happens to them, you can be held liable,
Yes.
and nobody needs that.
So, what do you recommend for a cancellation policy?
Well, first of all, I recommend one that works for the individual therapist, and then one that is clearly communicated and enforced. So the typical cancellation policy is 24 hours. I have a 48-hour cancellation policy because that's what works for me. And frankly, in 24 hours, it's really hard to find somebody else to fill a slot. It's hard to find somebody else in 48 hours as well. I am amazed with 48 hours how often it can happen, but the 48 hours gives people real pause because they say, oh, I better think about this ahead of time. And I also recommend that people not charge a cancellation fee that's less than their regular fee, whether it's the private pay or an insurance fee. I recommend charging the entire amount because you would have gotten it had the session taken place.
Yes.
This is really hard for therapists to do because they want to be liked, they want to support their clients, and they don't think it's supportive to say, we have an agreement and this is the agreement and I need you to honor the agreement. So what I recommend doing, and what I did a lot when I was supervising for 11 years, when my supervisees would come to me with this issue, I just recommend going over the cancellation policy really carefully with people and letting them know this time is for you. No one else gets it. It is reserved just for you. I am completely committed to helping you get out of therapy what you want out of therapy. And I have very few needs around that. You can show up however you want. But the one need that I have to help you get what you want is to show up. And if you don't, and I have a 48-hour cancellation policy, and I will charge you if you don't give me that 48 hours of notice, because it's really hard to fill the slot. And I am the only one who can take care of my own personal needs, like sick time, vacation time, or emergency time. And
Mhm.
I'm really upfront about it.
Yeah.
And I know I'm sounding a little harsh at the moment and cut and dry, but I'm pretty relational when I do it. And I'm always looking for a client's response to see how they're responding to what I'm saying. But they nod their heads. Now, will they remember when they cancel late? They may not. And I will remind them.
Yeah. I don't think you sound harsh at all.
Thank
I
you.
think you sound, I think you sound very thoughtful about the way you say it. In fact, I'm sitting here listening, going, man, I'm not that nice when I say it. I'm like 24 hours, that's it, done. But the way that you're bringing in the therapeutic relationship, your humanity within having this conversation, I think is really powerful. And our cancellation policy is a way that we are teaching and training people. We make an agreement. We keep our agreements,
That's
money's
right.
important. You steward it well. Like you're teaching them all these things. And hey, I make this space for you. I think that's such a loving way to present that to your clients.
Thank you. It's modeling good boundaries.
Yeah.
And that's really important right from the beginning. I also tell them if there's an emergency, I'm not draconian, but then I lay out what an emergency is and what it isn't.
Okay, I was curious about that. What
Oh
would
yeah, and
you
it's also written down. I mean, my cancellation policy, my informed consent's very thorough, as you can imagine, because I'm the documentation wizard, right?
say?
Um, yeah, my cancellation policy is very thorough, and I lay out what is and isn't an emergency. So what's an emergency? Going to the hospital, a car accident, a death, but a meeting for your job is not an emergency. At least it's not an emergency on my end.
What
Um,
about sickness? What would you say about that? Just
it gets a little gray. There are times when I give a client a choice. If they're really sick, they're not going to participate well in therapy. But I do all of my therapy at this point is virtual. But even if you do in-person therapy, you can have the option to do virtual. So I will ask them, are you well enough to do a virtual session? If they are sick and it's really clear to me that they have been sick, I charge them.
mm-hmm.
They were sick, but they didn't think to tell me until the night before.
Yep.
No, I'm nice about it. They'll
Mm,
say, well, it's okay, charge me if you have to.
yeah.
Thank you. I do.
It's interesting. I have a couple of stories I'd love to share and talk about. My clinical supervisor here at the practice, we had a conversation about cancellations, and she said, when people were sick, I used to not charge them. She said, but then it was happening a lot, so I started doing it. I started saying kind of what you just said, like, you knew the night before, you knew before this morning. And she said, once I started doing that, it was amazing how many people weren't sick anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
I also tell people a headache is not a reason to not come. It could be that you're getting a headache because you are coming. Yes. Picking up a sick child from school, that's an emergency, right?
Mm-hmm.
That happens. You have to kind of play it by ear. There are some people who say cancel is cancel, charge them.
Yeah.
But I also tell people if we can reschedule before your next planned session, I will. And if we can't, you'll know I've tried.
Yeah.
And I do try because I tell them I don't like to charge somebody for something they didn't get, but I do need to if we can't reschedule.
That's right. Because I mean, money is great, but we do this work because we want to do the work.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I'd much rather the client show up and get paid than them not show up and get paid because I actually get better.
That's right.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting, Beth. I had one therapist. Now, there were some other things about this lady that is the reason I stopped seeing her. I only went to 2 sessions. She did EMDR, and
Mhm.
I don't know EMDR, but boy, I ran it by an EMDR therapist later, and she was like, "That ain't good in EMDR." So there was some things going on.
Yeah.
But one morning, and I had to drive to see her an hour and a half. So I mean, or it was an hour because I didn't want to see a therapist in my town. About your trauma. I own a practice. But I woke up one morning with terrible pain, like stomach pain. I was like, there's no way I can get in this car and drive. Like I was doubled over. So I texted her, third session. I said, I'm so sorry, I cannot drive. And she didn't, virtual wasn't an option. Especially because of the state lines and stuff. She was in another state and she was like, I have to charge you. And it was 3 hours because it was in the I don't know what you call it, like
Oh,
2 to 3 hour EMDR. So she charged me several $100s, and I was like, "Wow, that was really intense." And I really did wake up this morning. I really was that sick, and I never went back after that. So anyway, it's just interesting, like to get on the other side of an experience, right? Because we're as therapists, and I agree with everything you're saying, and I do the exact same thing. But then I was on the other end of it thinking, huh, I wonder what this experience is like for her. And now I'm the client. But it really impacted me that there was no like grace about the experience. And I do think it's a little different having to go really far and having to have a long session as opposed to being able to do it from home and being on a virtual session for 45 minutes.
yeah. That's a real hard one because that therapist would lose 3 hours of income.
I know.
And that's where it becomes a real professional and clinical decision.
Yeah.
And where some people, probably mostly attorneys, would say, have a policy and stick with it, period.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you start messing with your policies, somebody can,
Oh, yeah.
it could come back to bite you.
So a lot of therapists will tell me I have a grace session. So I let them have grace the first time that they cancel. What do you think?
I think it's up to the therapist.
Yeah,
I have charged for the first time someone cancels.
me too. I mean, I guess to me, I feel like if I'm going to say to somebody, this is the cancellation policy, and then it happens and I don't cancel, what does that say about other things that I say?
I think that's a really good point.
It's tough, but
If
important.
you say, in an emergency, I will not charge you, but then somebody just calls up and says, I have to cancel, that doesn't sound like an emergency. For me, a headache is not an emergency. Wanting to do something different that day is not an emergency.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Well, are there any regards to insurance like to think about? I mean, I know with certain insurances you can't charge a cancellation, and how do we like handle that?
Well, for Medicare and no, for Medicare, you can charge. For Medicaid, in most states, at least in Massachusetts, you can't. I don't know about other state laws. Um, and you can charge, but you can't charge your private fee. You can charge what the insurance company pays. And I tell them that. I tell people it won't be your copay, it'll be the entire fee.
Yeah. And so you're talking about being the documentation wizard. Do you have your cancellation policy somewhere that people can see or purchase?
I have a very complete informed consent.
Yeah.
And in fact, I wrote up an informed consent that people can get off my website. And it's written for national standards, but we have state standards. So there's these wonderful not orange, yellow blocks in the consent that say, check your state standards for this. It's very thorough, reviewed by two attorneys, a bioethicist, It doesn't cover just cancellation fees. It covers confidentiality. I have one for couples, and that really covers issues of confidentiality and that are different than individual therapy. So there's a saying that good fences make good neighbors. Good informed consents make a good working, is the beginning of a good working relationship.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I have another question for you, kind of talking about money and guilt. A thing that comes up for me that I hear from practice owners is collections and sending clients to collections. I don't know if you have ever done that or thought about it or have advice about it, but any thoughts on that?
I have not done it. I have made the mistake of letting people go for too long without paying.
Okay.
And then they get upset with therapy and decide to drop out.
Mm-hmm.
And then they don't pay. And then I do have an attorney send a letter, but they don't pay. And I don't take them to small claims court. I never let it get that big.
Huh.
But it's just, so that's why I recommend get payment before the session starts. When I had an office, people handed me a check as they walked in.
Yep. I remember
That
that.
was so nice.
Uh-huh.
And there are other therapists who say, pay me for the month. We're going to put it on your credit card. They get permission to use the credit card, which you need, and pay me for the month. And if you miss a session, we'll just apply it to the next month. And other people who say you need to make a payment into this account before every session. I really think it's much better to get payment before the session starts than at the end. And I say this in my initial conversation, and it's in my informed consent. Payment is expected at the beginning of the session or once a month, or however it works for that therapist, or how they choose to create the relationship with the client.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, I don't want you thinking about money when you're walking out of here. I want you to be thinking about the work that we just did.
Oh, that's a good way to say it.
Thank
I
you.
love how you're so therapeutic. We actually just changed our policy on this. I own a group practice here in
Yeah.
Savannah. Of course, any change is big change when you're changing it for a lot of people. But we were running, ours is so not therapeutic. We were just running payroll and it was getting hard to run payroll because so many payments had not come through, or we would follow up after the session and try to charge a card and the card would be declined. So then at
Mm.
payroll time, we're calling up people to get those cards. And of course, you see the practice calling, you don't want to answer it. They're calling to get your credit card. So then they don't answer it. So it's so much easier for the therapist to get the payment. It's a therapeutic experience as opposed to getting a call from the admin. But so we told the therapist, we want you to start charging at the beginning. And of course it was, there's some scaredness, what if I offend somebody? We're talking about money at the beginning. I'm like, this is part of therapy. You should be talking about money. They're paying you for this service. So we started charging at the beginning as soon as they arrive, and it's been great. And what's really awful is, I said this to them, when a client, when their car doesn't get charged and they're getting charged a week later, 10 days later when payroll gets rolled, that's not good either. No one wants to be charged $100, $150 when they weren't planning on it. And so then they call the office and say, why is Water's Edge charging me? I didn't have an appointment today. Well, it's for your appointment last week, sir, that, we never charged you for. That's not good for clients.
Yeah, it's not.
So we've changed that, but it was getting to the point of we'd have 30, 40 cards that needed to be run. And, for all the therapists, that's one or two clients. To them, that's not a big deal. But when it becomes a whole bunch of us, I'm like, that's somebody's salary that I can't pay because y'all didn't collect your payments. So that made a big difference when we had that conversation of we're talking about thousands of dollars here, but even for you, you're thinking about one person.
But even if they're thinking about one person, if it happens twice a month over 12 months, that's 24 times. just on average, if it's $100 a session that they're missing, that's a lot of money.
It's so much money. Yeah. Yeah. So now we charge at the beginning and it has gone so much better. And then we can address cards and issues at the beginning of
Yeah.
session as opposed to at the end when everybody's worried or you're calling somebody afterwards. Like that wastes everybody's time. Yeah.
Yeah. Good fences create good neighbors.
I like
It's
that.
really important to model good boundaries and to hold them kindly and firmly.
Mhm. Well, Beth, this has been so helpful. If people want to get in touch with you, get your tip sheet, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can contact, first of all, they can go to my website, which is www.documentationwizard.com. They can send an email to support@documentationwizard and get my tip sheet. You might have a link in your notes that they can click on and get my tip sheet.
Well, this has been such a lovely conversation, and it has truly been a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you. Same here. Thanks so much for having me.